My new novel, My Virtual Obsession, is out now if you're curious about how loneliness can drive you to the brink of entering into a system that you never thought you would, but also how technology can infiltrate every aspect of your life. If you're into romance to thrillers, this is a book that will set it apart. It's not an invitation to read the book, but rather to immerse yourself in the experience. If you'd like to read or check out more, you can head to my website, willowhealing.org, or you can check out My Virtual Obsession on Amazon, Apple, Kobo, and all your favorite ebook readers. So now let's head to the show. Welcome to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We are so excited to have you joining us on this journey where we explore different ways to empower your soul, whether it's healing in your kitchen or all the way up in the corporate world. Come with us as we look into different ways to heal your mind, body, and soul. Hey everyone, it's Crestani with another episode of Willow Healing Matters, and today I'm joined by the lovely Julie Barth, who is the author of Notes from a Blackberry, From Blackberries to Thorns, and the forthcoming From Thorns to Blossoms. She is a mother of 6 and a professional writer whose life experience transcends fiction. Her journey, shaped by love, loss, and resilience, brings authenticity to her work. Julie's writing reflects her belief that life's deepest meaning is often revealed in its hardest moments, inspiring readers to embrace their own past with courage and gratitude. She is also the CEO and founder of the Colin James Barth Outreach, a nonprofit supporting women-led households in crisis with resources to restore security and stability. Drawing on her experiences as a caregiver, special needs parent, and trauma survivor, Julie empowers women to think resourcefully, prioritize their well-being, and reject the stigma of self-preservation. So a big welcome to the show, Julie.
Catherine, how are you?
Good, thank you. Oh my goodness, 6 children and running a CEO and writing books. Where do you find time for yourself?
That is my self-time, I guess. I don't know. I'm one of those people like idle minds is not good for me. So the busier I am, the better, I think.
And, you know, there's so much to unpack there. What led you to writing your books? And then there's 2 questions. Let's start with what led you to birthing your books?
Well, my first book was written 15 years ago, actually. My first husband came down with pancreatic cancer, and he was only given a couple weeks to live. And we had, at the time, 4 children. The oldest was 10 and the youngest was 6 months, and sandwiched in between was my special needs daughter. So when I would take him down to chemo, he was just so sick, and I had a BlackBerry, and we were coming off the throes of my special needs daughter. She had a rare genetic disease and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. So it was 4 years of traveling with her and surgery after surgery. So, we had finally resolved all of that. And literally within, 3 years, we found out that he had come down with cancer. So I was kind of unpacking everything that we had gone through with Tatum. That's her name. And so I just sat and I kind of just started our story on my BlackBerry, and then it was Tatum's story. And then it was kind of real time with Colin. And what I would do is I would take what I was writing and I emailed it back to myself. And at the end, I pieced it all together. And it was more, I didn't write it to release it. I wrote it because realistically, I kind of knew my children would never get to know him. So all the stories really just were my recount of things and wanting to make sure that I fully let my children know all of his courage, and Tatum too. So.
Yeah, which is such a beautiful way to honor his memory and capture just the events that took place. And, sometimes, you forget things and then other things make you remember. But what a beautiful way to capture that and put it in there through a BlackBerry. Why not?
I know. I only have another decade before nobody knows what that is. So I better get it out there quick.
There'll be a resurgence like everything in this world, right?
Probably, yes. Everyone's going to go for something without screens soon. That's about the only thing we haven't done.
And so as that evolved, and then you've created this beautiful organization for women who are in trauma, what led you to that as well?
Well, after my first husband, Colin, passed, his illness was so sick and so long and so drawn out that I kind of I got to a point where I didn't want to think about it anymore. And I packed it all away and I got remarried and moved away. And that led to a decade of really just horrible emotional abuse. So coming off of the second situation, I had told Colin when he died, or when he was in his last phase, that everything he was doing, all of his suffering, wasn't going to be for nothing. And we had this great community around us that, they had fundraisers for us, and they just really, without them, I don't know how I would have made it. So I told him that when he passed, and I kind of thought, well, not now. Now is not the time, or maybe never. I'm going to move on with my life. I'm doing what just starting over. So I think coming off the throes of the second one, where I found myself rebuilding again, it was almost like, oh yeah, I made this promise, and now's my time. So the charity was born out of not just helping the me who was getting divorced from emotional abuse and everything involved in that, but it also was the special needs me, and it was the caregiver, chronically ill, and then the widow me. Our charity is dedicated to not just helping one population. I find that a lot of charities are focused on one thing. And I guess the one thing we're focused on is women, but that's about it. So we're kind of like a concierge service where you come to us, and we don't think that you should have nothing before someone will help. So we're trying to match charities with the people who need resources, and kind of like a pick and choose kind of way, rather than looking for the full ride, whatever that it looks like.
And I think that's such an important contrast that you bring up too, right? Like, you don't want people at rock bottom. You want to help them and prevent that before they get there, and know they have support and don't have to get to that level before they actually have someone that can go, hey, we can help you. Let's support you through this situation.
Yeah. I mean, I remember and people would say to me, like when I first opened the charity, they were like, there's somebody out there for that. And I kept saying, well, if there is, I couldn't find them. So that, that's like a tree falling in the woods. If you don't hear it, it doesn't exist. So that's kind of where that all came from. And the other thing was, any assistance that I would try and find, they were like, oh, you have savings, come back, when you have nothing left. And I remember the day when I was doing my taxes, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm actually eligible for everything. And then there was, oh my gosh, I'm so poor. I'm eligible for everything. So, it's like, oh, great, I've lost everything. Someone will help. But, oh, gosh, I've lost everything. So that's a weird dynamic of being happy that you're, indigent. You should never be happy that you have nothing left.
I guess it's similar to, being a mum of a child with special needs. When you get that diagnosis, it's kind of relief that you finally figured out what's going on. But then at the same time, it's that, oh my goodness, we have this diagnosis. Now, what does that actually mean? And how are we going to navigate through that as well?
And how much are we going to take, how much are we going to believe of what people are telling me is going to happen? I think that was a very difficult thing for me. I don't know if you remember the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting.
I didn't read it, but yes.
I started like chapter 1, and I was like, I don't need to know this. And I think that's, the way that I always approach special needs labeling too, is like, okay, I might follow a certain path, but I don't need to know all of the things that you tell me could go wrong. And I think that's what the medical field does, is like, they just throw up everything. This is what to look for. And you're constantly like, looking for the shoe to drop, or, you're inundated with so much information that it's hard to just like see your child as being your child, because all of a sudden you see problem after problem after problem, and you lose sight of, your who you had before they were labeled,
Yeah. And my background's as a speech language pathologist. So I worked with a lot of children with high needs, especially autism. And
Okay.
it was amazing how many times I would have a client walk in and they weren't diagnosed. And I'm like, look, I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off. Please don't go Google it. I know you're going to anyway, but I really think they have autism because of X, Y, and Z. And I'm only telling you this because you can get funding to support you, and they need a lot of therapy right now, and
Right.
and then it would always be the same cycle. And I'm like, please don't Google it, because you'll get the worst case scenarios. And we don't know the prediction of what your child's going to be. We don't have a crystal ball to look into their future, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing was they would go home and Google it, and then they would hate me. And then they would sit with it. And then they would sit with it. And I always told them, I said, you're going to go home, you're going to Google it, you're going to hate me, you're going to question it, and then you're going to, okay, she has merit in what she's saying, and then you're going to come back. And that's exactly what happened. And they'd all come back and say the same thing. And they're like, oh, the doctor said they're never going to talk. I said, how do they know that? I said, I don't know if they're never going to talk. How can they tell that to you? I said, we just need to get in their world and you never know what will happen. But the biggest thing that was taken away was hope. Like it was this, why not just say this is a possibility, but we could also have the opposite possibility rather than, like you said, putting it in these finite little categories and giving the worst case scenario every single time.
Yeah, and I think it's a problem with expectations as well. I never actually had Tatum formally labeled. I always felt as if like it wasn't that I felt like a label was going to, stop her from doing what she wanted to do, but I never wanted it to affect the way other people looked at her or their expectations of her. And ironically, I fought and fought and fought. I mean, for years not to put it in any of her records. And then when she turned 18 and she needed Social Security, it took me like a year to prove that she was disabled. And I was like, the younger me, why didn't you just let it happen? But I mean, literally, I was like, here I'm fighting so hard in my piece, like, no, we're not going to label her. No, she's not disabled. And then the other 2 decades later, here's this woman like, she is so disabled. You don't understand, you know, coming to terms with what that means. Like, what does disabled mean? And how can I accept the fact that somebody's saying that about her and not change the way that I see her or other people are going to see her?
Yeah, and that's the tricky thing, right? It's how do you just accept a person for who they are rather than looking at all the titles and labels that are attached to them. And I feel it doesn't matter if you have a disability or don't, because we all get attached to these labels. Like you said, you had the widow role, you had the special needs mums role, you had like all these roles, but in the end, you're just Julie trying to make it all work.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is part of why I do what I do as well, because, I remember for many years I would say my name and people would be like, that instant pity, like, oh, you're the special needs mom, or you're the widow. And yeah, it was almost like just being me seemed to evoke emotions in people who didn't even know me just because they knew of me. It's all the same. It's all tied into the same preconceived notions about what we have about people or labels or things that kind of guide the way that we perceive anything that they do.
It's funny because yesterday I was running a group and we were talking about this question when people say, oh, what do you do? And I said, not even thinking about it. And I said, I never know how to answer them. So I'm like, what do you want to know about what I do? Because then you're not putting yourself in a box to appease them. And then instead they can be curious about what you do and you can have a very different conversation. Whereas
Yeah.
when you meet people and they're presumptuous and, instead of being curious, they become judgmental, or and it's not even necessarily bad judgmental. It's just they're judging you because of the situation that you've been through. It makes it really hard to say, actually, I'm here and I'm here doing all these amazing things. Why can't you see that way? Are you still stuck on this old version of what you
Yeah.
know about me?
And I find that a lot. And that's another thing that our charity's dedicated in. You come out of these situations, whether that means like I lost my husband to illness and I was a stay at home mom. And it was like, well, what have you been doing for the last decade? You go to get a job and they're like, well, where's your resume? And I don't know what makes you more qualified to be project manager, counselor, chef, whatever it is as a mom. You've done it all, fundraising for, but somehow because you say I'm a stay at home mom, the label of, so you haven't been doing anything for the past 10 years. And it really does limit, your options in the workforce. It shouldn't, but it does. And, especially in a world of AI, that makes it even more difficult because it's scanning your resume. And if you don't have a resume, or if you don't have a lot of things on your resume, you know, it doesn't matter what you've been doing because it just looks like you've not been doing anything.
And even if you have been doing things and you've been in the same job, it's like, oh, hang on, I want to expand this. But they're just going to look at that job. And I remember helping my husband. I'm like, no, 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 no. What else did you do there? He goes, what do you mean? I said, you were doing accounts, you were doing this, you were doing this. Let's put all those things in there. I said, because
Right.
you need to show that you can go for a higher position, or you need to show that you're more than just, the worker or just whatever it is. But people, we're not trained to think that way. We're not we're not educated to be that way either. Like you said, there's that stigma about, oh, you're a stay-at-home mom. It's like, well, do you know how much work that is? Like, I spend my day as a stay-at-home mom and go, holy crap, it's already 3 o'clock, and all I've spent all day doing is like making lunches and putting out fires and
Yeah,
I'm like,
I
yeah,
know. I find myself to be an insurance specialist. You know, if you need medical insurance, I got you. I know exactly what all the terms are. I've taught, but like you said, I think we almost want to present ourselves as being the thing that we do most rather than expanding all the things that we do in the most, because you want to seem specialized in one thing rather than seeing all the things that you're doing to get to that one thing. So it's almost like deconstructing rather than, and I think that's difficult, to see yourself. I always thought I was presenting myself as a writer. Oh, I'm a writer. But then it was like, oh, well, all you can do is write. Well, no, because I do, so I understand what you're saying. It's like, you have to think about all the things that you do to get to where you're at. And, that's a long road that a
yeah,
lot of people don't see the backstory to.
exactly. And it's like, you stay at home mom, you're excellent at time management. Let's put that on there. It's like, I am really good at multitasking. I can cook dinner.
Negotiation. I'm really
Yes.
good at negotiating.
But, and I did this exercise a few years ago with my old coach, and he said, what is the value that you put on all those things that you do for people? Like, if you had to charge an hourly rate, or you broke it down to all those things that you do as a mom, as a CEO, as an author, as a speaker, whatever it might be, whatever role it is, what is that value to people? And in the end, it becomes priceless because, and even parents I used to work with, I used to say to them, if you go down and you're unwell or something happens to you, what happens to the rest of your ship? What
Right.
happens to
Mm-hmm.
everyone else? And
Yeah.
once you realize how integral you are in that unit, or how integral you are in your children's lives, your community's life, whatever it might be, then you can see the value in what you're really worth.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, that it is funny when you sit down, because I am a single mom. And, there are times when I go to get like life insurance and, like thinking about, oh, well, they would have to hire a chauffeur and a cook. And, you're not just doing one thing, you're doing the job of 20 different people all at the same time. And there's no other job on earth that would require that you are doing that full time all day long. You don't get a break, you don't get a lunch, you don't get coffee, and you certainly don't get paid extra on the weekends or holidays.
No, you definitely don't. And it's, and then you've got the mums at homeschool as well, and you throw that on top of it. And it's just, all those different levels and those different layers. And, and then flipping back to what you've created with your not for profit, then you're creating a space for those women to come to before they have to start thinking about, oh my goodness, we're going to end up on the streets, or oh my goodness, all these sorts of things. Because sometimes you just need someone to support you before you hit rock bottom, rather than
Mhm.
hitting rock bottom and then having to dig out of a much, much bigger hole.
Yeah, there are so many organizations, and rightly so, and I'm so glad they're out there that, if you're fleeing your home, you can find a shelter. If you have, no food, someone will feed you. But the problem is that once you get to that point, it's so hard. It takes the average woman like a decade to recover after divorce. If we were able to help them where they're at, rather than letting them fall into, it's so hard to rebuild. If we were able to just let them stay here, find something that, a lucrative career for them, help them through the divorce process, where the legal fees and all that, there aren't enough organizations that literally are there to support. So, I know that our mission statement originally said, women in crisis. Like, we've changed language a little bit more, that we believe that it should be women in struggles. Like, you shouldn't be in absolute crisis. Like, your house shouldn't be on fire for you to be able to put something out. And that's kind of where our logic is, that, yeah, there are organizations that are out there and doing great work, but let's change the thought process to be supportive rather than complete aid.
Yeah, 100%. And for someone who is going through a process where they might be stuck in a situation with domestic violence, they might be going through grief or whatever it might be, what are some tips or recommendations that you might have for them? Because you've kind of not, you've been through every, I want to say you've been
Yeah, I
through a
have.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the biggest things that I preach right now, more to young girls. I have 4 girls. I find that there's this stigma for women to protect themselves, meaning to have their own accounts, pay themselves if they're at home in a way that, you would pay somebody else who's doing your work. And I find that there's almost this attitude that if you do put money aside, you're selfish, or that you somehow don't believe your marriage is going to work, and that you're almost dooming your marriage if you're proactive. But, the reality is, when I'm not trying to squash everyone's bubble, I had the most perfect marriage. If it had lasted and he would have stuck around, I'd probably still be married today. But things don't always go as planned. And we tell professional athletes, like, hey, make sure you have a backup plan. And that makes sense to everybody. Of course, you need a backup plan, but we don't tell women that. We don't say, okay, if you're going to be a stay at home mom, or if you're not going to be the primary breadwinner, you need to plan for a time in case something happens. God forbid, hopefully you will never have to do that. But it is not selfish. In fact, it's the only smart way to protect not just yourself, but your children if something should happen. And that's not just divorce, that's illness, that's, many, many different situations that you get into. So I'm a big proponent of trying to educate women about it's okay to value yourself and to make a plan in case something happens. So that's one of the first things. The second, if we're talking about a domestic abuse situation, I think the most important thing that I can reiterate to someone is, if you are even thinking that you might be a victim of, take it outside, find a third party. Unfortunately, in domestic abuse situations, you don't know what people know. You don't know whose side somebody falls on. And it's tricky, because when you do decide to leave, or if you even have an inkling that you might leave, and you finally draw the line in the sand, that's when things get dangerous. So just like you should have a plan in case something happens, in a domestic abuse situation, you need a third party who can guide you, keep it under wraps, keep it secret until you really are set up and ready to go, and can help you in that process. I think too often we think our best friends are on our side, and I'm not saying they're not, but your best friend's husband might be your husband's best friend, and all of a sudden you don't know who's talking about what. And I don't mean to make people paranoid, because that's not my job here. I'm just saying that getting truly a third party involved who doesn't know the situation is, first of all, going to give you the confidence to believe you, to say, yes, I really do, and unsolicited opinion about what you're doing, because you don't know for sure. A lot of it is gaslighting, and am I crazy? Is this really going on? Am I making, all of those questions can be answered outside of your situation with somebody who doesn't know you. They're not labeling you. They haven't heard that, oh, you're a little crazy sometimes. Or, a lot of times people say, well, you're just not a good couple. You just don't get along. It's a toxic relationship. In these situations, one person is toxic, not the relationship, one person. And defining that and understanding it and being able to process and do something about it is very important.
Yeah, I so agree with everything you said. So, like, even the first point of having your own bank account, I've had people when their husbands have passed and it's taken months to get access to their bank accounts because they have to go through all the legal things. If you don't have your own money, how are you going to start paying for groceries, and how are you going to,
Your
feed your
mortgage, yeah.
children, your mortgage, everything else? The bank's like, oh, we need proof that your husband died. It's like, oh my goodness, do you want me to send you the little packet from the funeral? Like, it's, but the hoops that people don't realize you have to go through if you do, like you said, end up in that situation, and to put things into play. And even, something so simple as having a folder with your passwords in it, like a written one, not on computer, because everything can be hacked these days, but
Right.
having a written thing so that if something does happen, they can get into the accounts. Like, I have all the passwords. My husband wouldn't know anything,
Yeah. It's
you know.
true.
And so
Yeah.
we've talked about that, like, hey, all these things are in here if we really, really need it. And, and then on the flip side of that, what you said about domestic violence and, yeah, the gaslighting, and you never know what happens behind closed doors. Like, sometimes you see the happiest couples on the outside, but then what is going on is not okay in itself. I've had people in my life, and they've said to me, hey, this is what's going on. And I was like, really? And I was, yes. And my husband would say, no. I'm like, well, if you think about it and you start to play the little snippets that you get, you can kind of put it together. But at the same time, you never know what's going on because, like you said, there's gaslighting, there's the false fronts, there's all these other things. And sometimes people run away too. Like when I got
They do.
divorced, my friends ran away. They all disappeared. It was almost like they thought they would catch the divorce. And I'm like, you can't catch divorce.
And
But
it, and
what
it
I,
makes them
yeah,
uncomfortable. Yeah.
that's what I figured out later. It was reflecting back to them flaws in their own relationship that they didn't want to look at, so then they get freaked out because they're like, oh, hang on, that's what's going on for me. And instead of starting to question and actually have a conversation, they just bury it and run away from the person who's reflecting that and triggering it back with them. So it can be a very lonely journey, no matter which way you go. And it is nice to have, like you said, that third party support who are neutral. And the
Yes.
best thing I did was go see a counselor who had no idea who either of us was, and just let me speak and say, this is what's going on, and reflect back to me what I needed to hear.
Yeah. And I find that people who are being emotionally abused are, I always thought it was kind of funny that my ex-husband would say like, oh, you're so smart, you're going to manipulate everyone into thinking that you're not the problem. But when I got into like a counseling situation, I did a mea culpa. Like I put out every single thing I had done wrong. And, I was very good at saying, but he didn't mean it, or in protecting him. And to your credit, when you said it's usually the couples that seem so happy. When we were out in public, I did everything I could to present myself as this happy person, and everything was fine, and don't look over here, everything's great, and oh gosh, look at how much in love we are, because there's so much shame in what's going on behind closed doors that you don't want people to know. So you are overly friendly, you're overly nice, when they're nice to you, you just think it's the greatest thing in the entire world. So from the outside, yeah, you probably are painting an overly happy inside, because you just don't, it's almost like if one little bit cracks, the whole thing is going to break down. You can't have that happen.
Yeah. And it's that facade. And again, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier of like how you present yourself and what your titles are and what people think that you should show up as. And when you strip that all down and show up authentically, sometimes people are very uncomfortable and they don't know what to do. And you do lose friends, you lose people in your life. But I've learned that they're not meant to be in my life. But it's taken, a lot of a lot of journey to
It's a
get to
hard
that point
thing.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say, I held on to a relationship that was very toxic because I was so afraid of losing friends, that they wouldn't believe me or that I was going to lose them. And when you get on the other side of it, what you recognize is if those relationships are so fragile and they didn't give you the floor to speak, then they really weren't your friends to begin with. And that's hard to stomach. But I can remember if somebody had come to me before Colin died, even because illness makes people very, very uncomfortable as well, and they walk away. If someone had asked me who would be there during the hard time, I would have said A, B, and C, and they were the very first people out the picture the minute it happened. And probably because they were too close to it, that they necessarily were like, I can't deal with that. So the phrase is, if you need anything, let me know, because that's what you got. Like, call me if you need anything. Yeah. Let me
Yeah.
know. Let me know if you need something.
I had a client go through exactly the same thing. A husband passed from cancer, and I was kind of still checking in on her because I just get intuitive hits and be like, okay, I need to check on her because you always message me when I need to speak to you. And the same thing was, she said, and that's exactly what she said. She said, we had so many people coming to visit him while he was unwell and offering their support. But as soon as he passed and he was in the ground, there wasn't like maybe two people left, if that. She goes, even the family disappeared, like everyone disappeared. And she's like, I never expected that. She goes, I am so lonely and I just want someone. I miss him every day and I just want someone to talk to. And
Yeah.
I said, well, just text me, like
Yeah.
just honestly, I'm not running away. I'm not scared of this stuff. I've done my work. I've, worked spiritually. So intuitively, I understand from the other side
Yeah.
as well. So, it's just, don't be afraid of it. But it's people question their mortality and then they question, their relationships, and then it just triggers so much in them.
I think it makes them feel vulnerable, and they have to find a reason why it happened to you so that they can say, oh, well, it's not going to happen to me because it happened to her. And I always say that, like, it was the weekday club. Like, all of a sudden I wasn't invited on the weekends anymore. Oh, if you want to grab a drink Monday through Wednesday or Thursday, I'm in. But Fridays were for couples, and I was no longer a couple. So it was like I didn't fit in anywhere anymore. There was a divorcee group. I wasn't divorced. There was a married group. And I didn't fit in anywhere. And I felt like nobody spoke my language anymore. So it is a very, very lonely, road to get back onto finding out who you are again and where you belong.
Yeah. And finding your tribe and community and people who just accept you for being Julie or Catherine or whoever, just accept you for you.
And you accept yourself as whoever you are. It took me many years to, my entire adult life really was being Colin's wife. And then all of a sudden I was like, I don't know who I am anymore, because we were Julie and Colin. And then I was just Julie. And I'm not sure, as an adult, I never stood on my own 2 feet. So that was difficult, trying to figure out, everyone else I'm sure was trying to figure out who I was. But the hardest thing was me figuring out who I was.
Yeah. Exactly. Without all the noise, without everything, playing in there all the time. And then you have children running you around as well. They take up a lot of your mind space.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're trying so hard to make sure that, they've had it so hard for so long, and sadness has been in the house that you almost are like, I can't do that anymore. We're going to, I remember it was almost this illusion, like, we're going to vacation. We're going to have fun. We're not going to deal with anything serious anymore. We're not going to talk about sadness. And you like build this fictitious world around you just because you want to break from all of it. But it's hard to come back from that break and live in the real world again, because the real world was no fun. I didn't want to be there anymore,
Yep.
Yeah.
I understand. And as we start to finish our time together, Julie, I ask the guests that come on the show, if you could heal or change something in the world, what would it be?
Right now, I mean, gosh, where do you start? Right now, I think that the one place that my heart is near and dear to, I think it is in women, and the roles that we play in society, and how hard we fight just to make everybody else okay. I wish that I could help women feel that okay in of themselves, and stop, trying to make everyone else happy, and really value who they are, because I think we always put ourselves last. It's great to a certain extent, but we only get one life to live as well.
100%. And it's so that I like to use the analogy that fill your cup up first and then let the overflow go to everybody else. Because if you're empty, what are you filling everyone else up with? Empty.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. True
story. And if people want to come and find you, Julie, or buy your books, or come learn more about your not-for-profit, where can they find you?
If you go to juliebarthauthor.com, CJB Outreach is on there. My special needs daughters, she has art that she sells. She's a self-taught artist, and the proceeds from her art go to fund the charity. So if you want to get involved, juliebarthauthor.com, and all the other tabs are there to find it, podcasts, books, all of that.
Beautiful. And thank you so much, Julie, for sharing your journey, but also the mission that you are doing to help women who are struggling. I went to say in crisis, but I'm like, no, who are struggling and just need that support so that they can come back to who they truly want to be.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We have so much love and gratitude that you have taken the time out of your day to empower you on your healing journey. The views shared by the person being interviewed might not necessarily reflect that of the host and should be used at your own discernment. Trust what resonates for you and follow your heart and soul guidance. If you have any underlying medical conditions or mental health issues, please consult with your healthcare provider before pursuing any of the recommendations. Likewise, you can always contact the person being interviewed to find out more information. This can be found in the show notes. Remember to activate, align, heal, empower, and find love in everything that you do.